Welcome and thank you for watching a joint solution showcase. I'm Dilfraz, part of the account management team at iceDQ. Today, we are here because enterprise data teams face two problems that are deeply connected, and yet most organizations solve them with completely separate tools, separate teams, and even separate processes. Think about what your data team is going through right now. Migrating between platforms, moving from legacy systems to Snowflake, Databricks, or Azure, or even refreshing a downstream system from a core data source. In that context, two problems show up every time. The first is you need the right test data, which is realistic, masked, production like, and ready when your team needs it. And also the second, where you need to know that the data is actually right. It's validated, it's reconciled, certified, test before deploy, before anything goes live. So when those two things work together as a single loop, migrations get faster, CI/CD pipelines stop breaking on bad data, and go live decisions are backed by evidence rather than gut feel. That's what today's showcase is all about. We have UBS Hainer and iceDQ, where we have formally partnered. I want to be very clear about what that means. This is a partnership where two companies are working together because the solutions are better together. Not just technically compatible, but genuinely we are complementary to each other. On one hand, XDM solves the data provisioning challenge, and on the other hand, iceDQ solves the data validation problem. With that, let me introduce the two experts joining me today. First, we have Bastian from UBS Hainer. Bastian is the sales engineer who has spent the better part of a decade working with finance and insurance clients on both the engineering and the automation side, and also as well as the software QA side. He brings a lot of experience and real depth on the test data provisioning challenge, regulated environments. Bastian, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And on our side, we have from iceDQ, we have Nachiket, who is a lead sales engineer who works closely with enterprise clients across banking, insurance, and healthcare, helping them solve complex data validation and reconciliation challenges at scale. Nachiket, welcome.
Thank you, Dilfraz.
Bastian, if you want to go ahead and introduce UBS Hainer to our viewers.
Absolutely. So first of all, welcome from my side, and thanks for setting this up today. So UBS Hainer has been in the test data management business for close to 30 years, with a head office in Germany near Frankfurt and a US office established in Los Angeles in 2024. Welcome from my side, and thanks for setting this up. UBS Hainer has been in the data management business for close to 30 years. We have our head office in Germany near Frankfurt and a US office established in 2024 in Los Angeles, which is where I'm sitting currently. We support clients globally through a reseller and partner network with a focus on highly regulated industries such as banking, financial services, insurance, and healthcare. But also we have retail clients. We're in automotive as well as the public sector. We offer mainframe-specific data management and performance optimization tools. But today's session actually focuses on XDM, our cross-platform data orchestration solution for the distributed world. Thank you, Nachiket. So for XDM is a data source agnostic tool that streamlines data access for your teams and solves what we call the 3D problem. So first of all, there is organizational complexity, right? Getting the right data to the right people at the right time across departments, teams, across different roles with different requirements is a challenge for many larger enterprises. Second, the regulatory complexity. So in regulated industries, obviously you want to make sure that this data access is realized while keeping sensitive information secure, like PII, PHI, credit card numbers, and so on and so forth, through anonymization and masking. And third, we solve technical complexity. So how to actually extract referentially intact data subsets from different sources that fully cover the business case at hand. And this can be, again, in this day and age, it's a challenge we come across quite often because nobody works on monoliths anymore. So that's why at the bottom left, you have a selection of source and target connectors. Those are performance optimized. And this is only a a selection that we're showing here. So you can see legacy systems, classic mainframe, Oracle databases, but also file storage, as well as cloud technologies like Snowflake and BigQuery, service APIs, as well as message brokers. So it's really across the board source agnostic. And what you can do is after you connect those data sources to XDM, your teams can actually access either de-identified production data or model-based synthetic data or freshly generated data generated through AI on demand or fully automated. And this really streamlines the whole data accessibility bottleneck that so many enterprises are seeing these days. One of our main use cases here, obviously, is test data for quality assurance, which actually brings us to today and why we're here today.
Thanks, Bastian. Nachiket, if you would like to brief about iceDQ.
Thank you, Dilfaraz. So let me give you a quick overview about iceDQ. iceDQ is a data reliability platform. We service Fortune 500 companies across different domains to ensure that their data is accurate, not only across systems, but across data pipelines. You can see on the screen that we serve Fortune 500 companies like Fidelity, Wells Fargo, Anthem, and we are also ISO certified, SOC 2 certified, and we also integrate with 50 plus data platforms that includes legacy platforms like your AS400, DB2, to cloud-based platforms like your Snowflakes, Databricks, and even applications like SAP, Salesforce, and also third-party platforms like your test management tools, ticketing systems, etc. That's the foundation. Now, let me actually tell you how iceDQ works. iceDQ covers the full data lifecycle across the 3 stages. The goal is 99.99% data reliability. The first stage is build and test, right? This is where your pipelines, migrations, BI reports are being constructed. iceDQ acts as a testing and certification layer here. This is where 80% of your reliability effort is applied because catching the problems at this stage is exponentially cheaper than finding them in production. The second stage is run and monitor. Once the pipelines are live, iceDQ stays in place. Continuous validation, reconciliations, exception reporting means that your team knows immediately when something breaks rather than your business informing that about you. This is the remaining 15%. The third stage is produce and observe. With our ML-based anomaly detection around freshness, volume, and profiling, it gives you the ability to not only do reactive alerts, but it gives you forward visibility so that your remaining 4.99% is also achieved. That's essentially about iceDQ. I'll hand it back to you, Dilfaraz, for the remaining discussion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both for sharing a very clear picture of each platform and the capabilities. Here's the context I want to set before we go into the use cases. One thing we see consistently with enterprise clients, and Nachiket and Bastian, you see this too when you interact with your clients, is that teams have the automation in place, they have the testing frameworks, but the data availability problem keeps breaking the loop. You can't validate data that hasn't been provisioned correctly, and you can't be confident in the provision data hasn't been validated end to end. So that's exactly what the next use cases we are going to demonstrate and talk about is going to address. So let's start with use case 1, enterprise data migration. Bastian, over to you.
Right. Yeah. So today's clients typically don't operate on monoliths like they used to, right? Technologies evolve. The need to move data between different platforms and storage technologies is commonplace for most enterprises. So some of you will be migrating certain data off legacy systems, other add new systems downstream that need to be regularly refreshed from the core system, and vice versa. Some of you have data flowing back into legacy systems. And so typically, when these migration use cases happen, typically enterprise migrations run multiple rehearsal cycles before each production wave, right? You want to be real sure that everything is working correctly end to end. So let's consider an example here. Consider a large bank is mid-migration. Wave 3 out of 8 is declared done, but nobody has verified every row, right? Nobody has verified that all 42 million account records landed correctly, that all foreign key relationships actually survived subsetting if you're migrating only part of your data, or if you're masking, how that masking certain fields didn't break downstream business logic. So the team just basically assumes the data is fine after looking at some random samples, typically around 1% of the data set. So that means essentially that 3 things are missing here, right? First of all, There's no quality gate after provisioning. So you haven't looked what actually got extracted from the source. Secondly, there is no reconciliation after migration. And third, you just don't have enough evidence to justify a go, no-go decision after this rehearsal. So, which means that moving forward might result in, worst case, post-cutover production defects. This could mean costly rollbacks or even regulatory findings with respect to your data validation processes. So how do we avoid this? How can we do better? An ideal workflow would look something like this. You choose a realistic data set from the source that covers your whole test scope. Then you mask sensitive information and provision to staging. In the second step, you validate that process end to end and reconcile any inconsistencies, right? So only then are you in a position to make an informed go, no-go decision. And for this to work, we need two solutions for this two-step process. And one that provides the right data and one that checks that the data is actually correct at the end. Ideally, both of them fully automated. So here's what we propose. So XDM, which is the tool that we offer, can serve as the extraction and masking part of this workflow. So XDM can extract 2 million rows per minute with referential integrity. It can mask PII. It can provision consistent production-like subsets. And it provides, very importantly, automated and repeatable workflows. Secondly, on the other hand, iceDQ makes sure that the migration was successful. All records are checked for every wave, not just random sampling. They make sure that business metrics are still intact, referential integrity is actually preserved. And finally, it produces audit logs that you can then use as a basis for a decision and as audit-ready proof that a wave was successful. So with both solutions in place, you're in a comfortable position to certify every wave automatically, monitor integrity beyond sparse sampling, and base your go-live decision on documented evidence, right? And on top, you cut migration timelines by up to 30% because you saved yourself manual probing and potential real work and rollbacks.
Thank you, Bastian. The wave flow diagram which you have shown here really makes this tangible. I have a couple of questions to help people watching understand this more deeply. And my question is around multi-platform complexity, where enterprise migrations often involve a mix of legacy systems. Some are on-prem, some are partially on the cloud. How does XDM handle that multi-platform complexity when provisioning data across different environments in the same migration project?
Right. So we get this multi-platform question a lot, and that is exactly what XDM is built for, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, XDM integrates with a variety of legacy and cloud endpoints, databases, file systems, APIs, message queues, you name it. And so you don't need custom plumbing for each source and target. This is already integrated in the solution. XDM keeps one central data model and mapping layer that holds all the relationships, structures, and policies. And from that model, it generates platform-specific schemas and deployment artifacts. XDM also supports phased migrations, so you can provision subsets of the model to different platforms at different times if you need it, and you can also roll back whenever you need to. Finally, let me just point out that it enables consistent governance. So security and data policies are defined centrally within XDM and then enforced in each environment, which means that nobody can ever see anything that they're not supposed to see.
Right. Related to that, Bastian, different industries have very specific requirements around how data is transformed and masked. A bank has different PII rules to an insurer. So how does XDM essentially handle those industry requirements without the setup being a project in itself?
Yes, so I showed a short customer list at the beginning, right? So XDM comes with industry-specific masking templates. I mean, we've been working particularly with finance and insurance for a long time, so retail as well. So we have industry-specific masking templates that come with the solution, for example, for names, addresses, social security numbers, credit card numbers, and so on, which can be used either as is, or they can be customized to whatever is needed for a specific client. Clients can also bring their own scripts and integrate them into XDM. So if you already have a solution in place or a partial solution that you would like to keep using because it's trusted internally, you can bring this into XDM and there is no rework necessary.
Awesome. I have a follow-up question on that, like on the provisioning model, essentially. You mentioned teams can choose between on-demand and fully automated. For a team starting with CI/CD data testing, which model do you typically recommend they start with and why?
Yeah, so first of all, XDM comes with its own API and soon MCP server, and those allow full automation, right? If you want a fresh data set every night or at a given point in time, XDM can provide this without the need for manual intervention. On top, we offer a so-called data shop, which is a self-service layer, where even a non-technical user can come in, make some selections, and then order their data in business terms. And get it delivered to their specific environment on demand with a click of a button. Of course, XDM will always take into account who's asking and what they are allowed to see. So what needs to be masked or anonymized, depending on that user's access rights. And honestly, I would recommend at the start defining one or several data shops first and basically test the process with on demand. And as you get confident that those data shops are doing what they're supposed to do, you can trigger those same tasks that run in the background through the API or the MCP.
That's a really important distinction on for on-demand versus fully automated. Nachiket, for teams that are new to automated reconciliation on the iceDQ side, what does getting started actually look like? How quickly can a team realistically have their first wave certification running?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So with iceDQ comes with pre-built rule templates specifically around reconciliations, right? Bulk rule generation is possible. Now you can do that using our bulk rule generation utility, especially when it comes to migration, where you are going to apply standard set of rules like source to target reconciliations, count checks, schema compares. Those can be essentially templatized, and the same template can be applied to hundreds of tables, and bulk rules can be generated. With iceDQ also, we now have AI capabilities that allows you to bulk generate rules by just uploading the mapping documents and just pointing to the connections. So using both these capabilities, the rule generations can be sped up from weeks to hours, right? So depending upon which capability you choose to use, iceDQ essentially supports bulk rule generation out of the box.
That's great. So essentially, both platforms are designed to fit into how enterprise teams already work, and we are not asking them to change their processes, but we are essentially helping them automate them. So yeah, let's move with that. Let's move to use case two. Nachiket, over to you.
Thank you, Dilfaraj. This use case is something that I have discussed with a lot of data engineering teams and data leaders. This problem comes across a lot. Now, while data pipeline testing is important, you always want to ensure that when you build a data pipeline, you validate your source data, you make sure that as the data goes through the data pipeline from source to target, it is compared, your transformations, whether they are happening correctly or not. So that's the problem iceDQ solves. But a lot of times, what happens is that the teams have invested in this automation, right? They have essentially built their CI/CD pipelines and they are raring to go. But what is missing is the data, right? Usually they have to wait for 4 to 6 weeks to get fresh production-like test data, right? And that essentially causes three problems. The first, the delay itself can essentially, cause the sprint to be delayed, which means that your go-to-market can be delayed by that. Secondly, the teams can have a workaround, right? What they can do is they can have 6-month-old data set and they can start running their iceDQ rules on that. But you can have 100% pass rate on that, but that could be false confidence because let's say in the past 6 months, you have new product codes, new pricing tiers, new regulatory thresholds. All of that would be absent in your 6-month-old data. The third problem, right? If you are manually or randomly curating samples, right, your low frequency, high impact scenarios could be missed, right, because you have essentially not taken them into account, right? That's where a lot of production failures occur. So what we are seeing over here is that if you do not have production-like test data, right, your investment, CI/CD, shift left data pipeline, essentially without a joint solution, what happens is that you can have a 4 to 6 weeks delay where your sprint is sitting idle, right? You don't find your edge cases, right, and that can propagate down into production. Or if you start testing with your old data, right, your new thresholds are absent. Now, this is where iceDQ and XDM can solve this problem. Now with XTM, you have the ability to get production-like data every sprint on the same day, right? XTM essentially profiles the production data to surface edge cases, right? And that test data can be available to the CI/CD team when they start the process. With iceDQ, you can essentially make sure that all your checks for your data pipelines are built into the pipeline itself. So you can make sure that you have your validations, reconciliations, checks to catch your transformation breaks. And with AI capabilities, we can have these checks generated, at the notice, right? And also we have the ability to make sure that even if we find any data issues, right, the pipeline can be stopped so that they cannot propagate downstream. So what you see on the slide is once we do a code commit, right, then XTM auto provisions. The test environment gets seeded. Once the test environment gets seeded, iceDQ checks which are built into the pipeline, they run, right? If they are passed, then perfect. But if they fail, we basically reach out to the concerned person with an exception report, which includes the data defect. And we also have the ability to stop the data pipeline. So if I have to bring it back all together with XTM and iceDQ, you will have fresh mass production-like data available at the same day every sprint, right? We will essentially make sure that your rare scenarios are surfaced by test data finder, your regression is comprehensive, and every build triggers auto provisioning of your test data as well as iceDQ rules, which in turn would lead to improvement in productivity and ensure that your defects in caught in development and do not propagate into production.
Yeah, thanks, Nachiket, for sharing the approach to shifting data testing pipeline to the left. The 4 to 6 week test data delay, which you mentioned, is something I think a lot of people watching will recognize immediately because that's a very real bottleneck in the industry, right? Bastian, I have a question for you here. You mentioned the test data finder surfaces edge cases that a random sample would miss. Can you walk us through what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. But first, let me point out that, typically we reduce those wait times for clients from weeks to minutes, typically. But so you want to be intentional about what your test data needs to look like, right? And for this, XTM has source analysis tasks. So making sure that you're not random sampling, but the subset you're creating is representative of the real world. Maintain age distributions, geographical distributions about where your clients are, and so on and so forth. On top, we have the so-called test data finder, which can scan the source and lets you actually handpick data sets given certain criteria. So if you want to make sure a certain edge case is included, you can find data sets that satisfy those constraints and then pick them to be part of your test data set. So you can target those edge cases intentionally by just defining parameters, and the test data finder will surface those data sets that satisfy those.
Interesting. That's a great feature. Thanks, Bastian, for sharing. Nachiket, you mentioned Gen AI rule generation. Which is an interesting capability for iceDQ. But for a team that already has manually built validation rule, how does that work alongside what they already have? Is it additive to what they're doing, or does it replace their existing rules?
Essentially, what we have the ability to do is if the team already has some rules built in, we essentially have a migration utility which can bring all those rules into iceDQ. Or if you have an existing mapping document, we essentially can take that and generate all those rules back into iceDQ. So it's not that all the work that had been put in would go away and you have to start from scratch. We can actually leverage what is present and build it into iceDQ so that you can scale, right? So iceDQ essentially gives you the ability to generate as many rules as you want. There is no restrictions on the number of records or number of columns that you are going to validate or reconcile across data platforms. So you can leverage your existing assets and get performance and scale with iceDQ.
Interesting. That matters a lot in enterprise environments, where rules carry years of business knowledge. So with that, let's move to the joint value proposition. Bastian, if you would like to kickstart the joint value.
Right. So this is just an overview of a few more use cases, because there's obviously more than just the two that we just got into in detail, right? We've already talked about banking modernization in the migration use case. You can also think of an insurance use case where GDPR plays a central role, and you're consolidating policy systems, and you have to make sure that GDPR is enforced across those. You can think of a merger and acquisition scenario where maybe a bank acquires another company, and then both institutions have different data stacks, which happens all the time. And so a lot of integration testing must be done before the systems merge. And this is a good scenario for this joint solution. For use case 2, if you're already running iceDQ but spend a lot of time waiting for data refreshes, I just mentioned, we can bring those wait times down substantially. Or you're in healthcare and you'd like to use realistic synthetic data instead of dealing with removing PHI, this is something that we can bring to the table. Or even if you're in retail or telco, and you don't have as much sensitive data, but you might still wait for test data or the right test data for weeks just due to organizational challenges, which is something that we're solving with this. So if any of this sounds familiar, do feel free to reach out to us, either Nachiket or myself. And I'll hand over to Nachiket.
Thank you, Bastian. So the joint value proposition comes down to two critical and complementary capabilities. XDM delivers the right data. As a mature, specialized test data management platform, it ensures production-like data is available on demand across teams repeatedly and without breaking the compliance. It solves the problem of provisioning completely. iceDQ ensures the data is right. As a mature data reliability platform, it ensures that data is correct across systems. It is continuously monitored, and it also includes observability. It solves the validation and reconciliation problem completely. These two are independent platforms that basically provide the joint solution to the use cases that we discussed. XDM without iceDQ leaves you with great data and no validation. iceDQ without XDM leaves you with powerful rules, but with no fuel to run them. Together, we close the loop end to end. Thank you.
Thank you both. Let me close with a summary of what we have covered today. UBS Hainer XDM delivers the right data, production like mask, referentially intact, on demand, or fully automated. And then iceDQ ensures that the data is validated, reconciled, auditable every wave and every build. I see this partnership is pretty straightforward and significant in the sense that enterprise migrations and shift left pipelines both tend to fail at the same point, which is the handoff between provisioning and validation. What we have demonstrated today is what that handoff looks like. Number one, like when it's automated, and number two is when it's integrated and it's backed by audit grade evidence. If you like to explore how this joint solution applies to your environment, a migration you're planning, or maybe a CI/CD pipeline you're looking to mature, or even a compliance challenge, please reach out to either of the team directly. Both Bastian and Nachiket are happy to connect one-on-one. And if you found this useful, please follow Bastian and UBS Hainer team on LinkedIn. We have added the LinkedIn links in the description below, and follow iceDQ as well, also in the description. We share content regularly on data reliability, data testing, and what engineering teams are doing in practice across banking, insurance, and healthcare. That said, thank you to Bastian and the UBS Hainer team for joining us today. Thank you, Nachiket, and thank you for everyone who's watching this video.